Hey everyone, Shlomo Brody here. Today we're going to review the proposal of Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovitch to try to address some of the conversion pressures or crisis, according to some, in the state of Israel. Rav Rabinovitch proposed already in the 1980s employing a Talmudic technique known as Ger Katan of converting minors in order to help solve the issue of the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are culturally affiliated as Jews, who are fully integrated as Jews, but are not halakhically Jewish. Many of whom come from the former Soviet Union, but certainly not all. Some are born through surrogacy, some are the children of Israelis who marry non-Jewish women abroad, and in any case, there are many, many Israelis who are living today in the state of Israel who see themselves as Jews, who want to be Jewish, but are not halakhically Jewish. Part of the challenge here is that many of these potential converts, while they certainly affiliate and identify as Jews, do not intend to fully keep mitzvot. Meaning, if we're honest, we understand that even when they say, I accept upon myself mitzvot, we know that they're not going to be fully shomer Torah mitzvot. If that's the case, can they be converted in this scenario? So the Gemara speaks about the fact that we tell people, potential converts, about the mitzvot, and they have to be mekabel them, they have to accept them. The Gemara in Bechorot even discusses the idea that if a person says, I won't keep only one mitzvah, but I'll keep the rest, we should accept them as a convert. This led many to understand and claim that if a person is not going to be fully observant, they shouldn't be converted. Now, in the medieval time period, this wasn't such a big issue because there wasn't that much conversion going on. And when a person did convert to Judaism, they were both culturally and religiously deeply integrated into the Jewish community, so the norms of observance were more or less basically observed. In the modern era, however, it became more complex. Secularization, along with the advent of civil marriage, meant there were opportunities for people to be a part of different communities at the same time. And in many situations, when we had someone who was marrying someone from another faith community, the question became, should we allow conversion in this case for the sake of marriage? Now, the Gemara discusses the fact that we don't normally allow conversion for the sake of marriage, but the poskim assumed, more or less, that a person who was converting nonetheless in this circumstance wasn't converting for the sake of marriage, because after all, they could just be intermarried, given civil society's acceptance of civil marriage and of intermarriage as a whole. And therefore, we assume them to be genuine about their intent. But nonetheless, the question became with regard to adults, what if there's a situation where we don't think there'll be full-fledged Shmirat HaMitzvot? Should we still convert in these situations? So many poskim said no. We anticipate and expect and demand full Shmirat HaMitzvot. And if you convert people in this situation, it's counterproductive, A, because the conversion probably isn't good, or at least shouldn't be done halakhically, and B, it's a counterproductive strategy, because instead of discouraging from people from intermarrying, you'll basically be sending off the message, well, it's okay if you want to intermarry, because we'll find a way to convert your potential spouse, even though they're not going to be fully committed to Shmirat HaMitzvot. However, some poskim felt like there was room for leniency. Rav Chaim Ozer Grzinski, Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, and others discuss a case in where we know that the person won't be fully observant, but they'll be generally committed to some form of mitzvot observance. In that case, they felt it was productive and permissible to convert in these 9 ideal circumstances. In general, the conversion of minors has always been a question. After all, Kabbalat mitzvot, accepting the mitzvot, assumes that a person can conscientiously say, I'm taking upon the yoke, the beautiful yoke of mitzvot. How can a person do this if they're a minor? The Gemara asks this question and asserts that the Bet Din has the ability to accept, to consent on behalf of the minor. Zochen la'adam shelo b'fanav is the halachic term that's used. It's a zchut, in this case, to become a convert. And when a person is not even around, meaning that the person doesn't have the ability to accept, we accept upon their behalf in certain circumstances. And the Gemara says this is precisely how conversion for a minor works. But the question became in the modern era, well, is this true that's always a zchut, that's always for the benefit of the minor to convert them if they're not going to be raised to be shomer Torah mitzvot, to be fully observant? After all, aren't we just setting them up to be a sinner. They'll become a bar bat mitzvah. They'll be obligated mitzvot. They won't keep the mitzvot. This isn't really doing someone a favor. And indeed, many poskim asserted that it would be inappropriate and wrong to convert a minor if we didn't believe that they would be fully shomer Torah mitzvot. Rav Yaakov Weinberg, Rav Yitzchak Cohen Cook, and many other prominent poskim asserted that it is wrong to convert minors in such a circumstance. And moreover, once again, they said this is a counterproductive strategy, because basically you're sending off the message of saying, well, you can marry out, but we'll find a way to convert your children back in order to make it socially acceptable or to have them be socially integrated. That's not a good message to be sending off to people. However, there were poskim, the Beit Yitzchak, Rav Moshe Feinstein, who, in the context of adults, said that we demand full observance. But when it came to a child who we weren't sure would be fully observant, said that nonetheless it is a zchut for us to convert them. Rav Shmekels and Beit Yitzchak discusses the case where we're not sure of the person's intent and where the child will be raised, and nonetheless he says it's a zchut to be part of the kedusha of Kal Yisrael, to be part of the community that zochel olam haba, and therefore we should convert the minor anyway. Rav Moshe Feinstein sides along this way as well and says it's a zchut for a child no matter what to be a Jew. And in the case that was sent him from Minneapolis, when there's a situation of a day school where many of the kids weren't halakhically Jewish and the teacher wanted to know what he should do, Rav Moshe said, I'd even convert them when they're minors. It's true they might not be raised to be shomer Torah mitzvot. Nonetheless, it's a great zchut for them to be a member of the Jewish people. Now, the situation is a bit different when it comes to Israel, because after all, we're dealing with a climate which is culturally Jewish, which has a Jewish calendar, Shabbat, Yom Tov, which has Jewish songs in the air, which has kosher food in all of its supermarkets and many kosher restaurants. And so the question becomes, are the equations, the variables here, somewhat different? In order to address the problem of having a situation where you have fully integrated Israelis who are not halakhically Jewish, Israel set up a conversion authority in the 90s. And its first head, Rav Yisrael Rosen, said, we'll do a standard when it comes to Ger Katan, in which we'll accept people who come from homes that are not fully observant, but we'll demand that they be given religious education. They be in the Mamlachti Dati, the national religious education system, and the hope being that even if they don't come from a religious home, by being in such an environment, social and educational, they'll come to be, at least it'll be plausible to think, that they'll be accepting upon themselves a religious lifestyle. But in the absence of them taking upon a religious education or having their parents give them a religious education, many poskim, Haredi and religious Zionists alike, feel that it's inappropriate to convert minors in such a situation. Rav Yaakov Ariel, for example, stated that if we don't think that the child will grow up to be religiously observant, we should not convert them. It's not a zchut for them in this scenario. Others have also raised questions about the notion of Ger Katan and asserted at this point there are about 400,000, even close to 500,000 in some estimates, of people who aren't halakhically Jewish but are culturally Israeli, and converting a few kids here or there, they're doubtful whether this is really going to solve a problem. Maybe there's not such a great problem. Maybe the problem will go away. People will move out of Israel. Maybe the intermarriage rate won't be such a big deal. But either way, they argue, it doesn't matter. You can't water down the standards of conversion. In contrast to this approach, Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovitch, already in the 1980s, started to propose doing Ger Katan. And he said a number of different arguments to refute those who thought it was a bad idea. A, the precedent from Chutz La'aretz, he felt like, was not a good one in this situation in Medina Israel. Why? In Chutz La'aretz, the fear was that this would send a bad message, that this would encourage intermarriage. But in Israel, one of the goals here is to prevent intermarriage, since people are going to be culturally integrated with each other and meet each other in the army and university and the workplace. It's a terrible thing to have people who we more or less assume culturally to be Jewish and Israelis, but aren't halakhically Jewish. So if you don't convert them, you're actually going to be causing greater numbers of intermarriage. Moreover, Israeli society, because religion is so present in the public sphere, automatically, almost by default, allows for a certain modicum of observance through kosher food, through a Jewish calendar, through many other rituals, through many other cultural identifying marks. And therefore, Rabinovitch felt like there is a certain sense of Kabbalat mitzvot that is genuine when a person wants to accept upon themselves the traditional Jewish lifestyle, not fully observant, but Masorti, if you will, in terms of keeping some of the basic phenomenon that Israelis tend to keep. Now, of course, Rav Rabinovitch preferred that the children be given a Jewish education in a religious school, in a religious context. Obviously, there's a better chance, there's better reason to think that they'll come to be religious from that education, but he was insistent upon the fact that we should not demand this as a criterion. Bet Din has the power to convert minors in all circumstances, and therefore he believed that in order to deal and address with the situation of having many people who want to be Jewish, including many people who feel that they are Jewish, who feel that they have Jewish ancestry, but simply can't prove it, that we should find a way to convert them, and the way to do this is to do it when we can have a lower standard for observance, which is the case with Ger Katan. Indeed, one of the factors that some invoke is a notion of Zera Yisrael, the notion that we should preserve and save the seed of Israel, the descendants of Jews, who throughout the ages, throughout the centuries, might have become assimilated in one form or another, but somehow have made it back to Medinat Yisrael. Those people we should make sure that we preserve within the Jewish people by converting when their children are minors. Rav Re'em HaKohen has also added another factor. He says, if you believe that the state of Israel is some form of kibbutz golayot, is an ingathering of exiles, well then you have to ask, what was the ingathering of exiles that was imagined by the prophets? Was it that the Jews of Teaneck and Golders Green and all sorts of large, firm communities will be making aliyah? Or does it also include people from all corners of the earth? And if that's the case, if the latter option is true, that people will be coming from everywhere, well, Jewish history has had many travails, and people have been spread across the globe, and not everyone was in such a religious or Jewish environment, including many that had centuries of suppression or oppression, and therefore we have to anticipate the fact that there's going to be some mixed lineage around, and in order to address that situation, in order to facilitate kibbutz goliot, we have to be willing to do conversion, and the best way to do it, the best time to do conversion, is when someone's a minor. Implicit in what they're saying is that what I think is actually the most important factor, which is when you look around the world today in the state of liberal democracies, you see how fragile the social fabric is of many different countries. And Israel, in one form or another, has managed to keep its social fabric together, even though it's quite fragile, and even though it's being pulled at many different directions because of all the cultural diversity that we have in this country. Now, if it emerges to be a situation where you have two types of Jews, or two groups of people, not in small numbers anymore, and where people who feel Jewish aren't going to be accepted to be Jews anyway, then you run into a very dangerous situation where people are being pushed away, and it can cause all sorts of difficult social relations in this country. Now, of course, one should have no illusions that Ger Katan is going to solve all the problems. I'm not a believer in solving all the major problems. What I mean by that is that there are some solutions out there. There aren't solutions to solve everything, but can help reduce the tensions, can help reduce the problems. And in our circumstance, the notion of Ger Katan affords an opportunity for those who see themselves as Jewish, for those who believe maybe they historically are Jewish, and certainly those who want them and their children to be fully a part of the Jewish people, to be part of the halakhically Jewish people and the Jewish community, to convert in a recognized manner. And therefore it seems to me that this should be part of our toolbox, that the notion of Ger Katan should be utilized for those parents who want their children to be brought under the yoke of heaven, for those parents who want to guarantee that their children will always be a part of the Jewish people.